Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm very pleased to be with such an esteemed, excellent panel to discuss the challenges and opportunities for clean energy in the MENA region. So before this, I will just introduce myself very quickly. My name is Diala Hawila. I work in the International Renewable Energy Agency in the policy analysis. So I will just give a brief introduction of the panel, and then I will introduce my esteemed panelists, and then we will get into the discussion. So as we saw now, the presentation from Matthias from BNEF, Matthias presented a scenario for 2 degrees Celsius by 2050. But at IRENA, we are looking at the World Energy Transitions Outlook that looks at a 1.5 degree scenario. So in this 1.5 degree scenario, the total final energy consumption needs to decrease from by around 8%. All of the efforts should focus on energy conservation and efficiency, on renewable energy, on electrification, green hydrogen, and other solutions. So when we look at renewable energy, first of all, electrification, the share of electricity in the mix increases from 21% to 51% as we make more efforts to electrify end uses such as heating and cooling and transport. So in the IRENA scenario, 90% of this electricity comes from renewables. And for hard to abate sectors such as transport and industry, we have sustainable bioenergy and hydrogen are deployed, accounting for 18% and 12% of the total final consumption. 66% of the hydrogen comes from renewables. So this transition in IRENA scenario requires a total investment in transition-related solutions such as renewables, energy efficiency, and end-use electrification, power grids, flexibility, innovation, and carbon removal measures of around $4 trillion per year until 2050. Now, BNEF's analysis suggests that around $500 billion was invested in 2020. So we have to move from $500 billion in 2020 to $4 trillion per year until 2050. Now, out of the $500 billion invested in 2020, the MENA region attracted less than 12 billion. So the MENA region attracted them less than 12 billion of a total of 500 billion globally. And a lot of this is concentrated in a handful of countries, such as, for example, the UAE. The momentum has also picked up in Saudi Arabia. And both countries are major oil producers. The region has around 60% of the world's oil reserves and 45% of the world's natural gas reserves. And the oil and gas sector constitutes a considerable share of revenues and plays a crucial role in the economy, including job creation. So as the world embarks on the energy transition, provisions need to be made to ensure that this is a just transition. And for the transition to be successful, it must leave no one behind. In some countries with looming political and economic crises in the region and instability, the energy can bring considerable hope. The potential for energy security, creation of new industries, job creation in a region with an average 25% of youth unemployment rate are very meaningful. But so far, these countries have not been able to create an enabling environment to attract investments. So our discussion today will be structured into 2 main parts. The first part will focus on countries where the clean energy sector has kicked off, where the perceived risks in some technologies, mainly those related to power, have gone down. And we are looking into the future, into new technologies to take the transition even further, such as green hydrogen and electric mobility. And then we will go to the second part of the discussion, which will focus on countries that are still lagging behind in their transitions, where the transition is much needed for energy security, socio-economic development, and jobs. But in these countries, the risks are still too high. And then at the end, we will take some questions from the audience, and we will summarize main takeaways for the region as a whole. So joining me today for this discussion is an excellent panel that I am honored to moderate. We will hear from 2 of the largest developers in the region, Masdar and Aquapower, one of the main banks, Standard Chartered, and a prominent international law firm, Dentons. So I will start with introducing the panel. Joining us today is Mr. Mohammed Abdul Qadir Al-Rahami. He's the Director for Asset Management and Technical Services in the Clean Energy Division of Abu Dhabi's Renewable Energy company, Masdar. In his capacity, he is the focal point of stakeholder management and interface with all utilities and service providers, leading all of Masdar's initiatives related to water and sustainability and playing a key role in shaping the regulatory framework for the energy sector in Abu Dhabi and the UAE. He's working to enhance the performance of Masdar utility investments, joint ventures, special purpose vehicles, through effective and efficient governance to support the company's overall strategy. Welcome, Mohammed.
Thank you. Thank you, Daria.
Also with us today, we have Mr. Rajiv Nanda, the Chief Portfolio Management Officer and Acting Chief Investment Officer of Aquapower. With more than 25 years of experience, he is responsible for Aquapower's growth and remains functionally in charge of new business development, legal projects, acquisitions, and divestitures, and corporate and project finance. Welcome, Mr. Rajiv. We have also with us Mr. Sunil Koshal, he was the Regional CEO of Standard Chartered Africa and the Middle East, and a member of Standard Chartered's Global Management Team, the highest executive body within the bank. In March, Sunil was appointed as Global Advisor for MoneyTap. He has been with the group for nearly 23 years and has approximately 33 years of banking experience in diverse markets across North Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, Middle East, and Africa. Sunil has held senior roles across wholesale, retail, SME bankers, and country management within the group. We're very pleased to have you with us, Sunil.
Thank you for having me.
And last but not least, we have Ms. Vary Main Garcia. She is a partner in the energy team in the international law firm Dentons in the Middle East Regional Head of Energy, Transport, and Infrastructure. Vary also serves as Vice Chair of the Board of the Clean Energy Business Council. He is corporate and commercial lawyer specializing in energy and infrastructure projects, advising on project development and M&A in the energy and infrastructure sectors. She has passion for renewables and clean energy, working on projects across the Middle East and North Africa. She focuses in particular on advising on utilities projects, including renewables projects, solar utility, PV, CSP, and CNI, waste to energy, and wind, in addition to advising on conventional water, wastewater, and district heating and cooling projects. So I'm very excited with this panel, and we will start the discussion today with Mr. Mohammed. So, Mohammed, what are the latest developments of Masdar in the region in terms of renewable energy projects? And has the pandemic impacted your activities on the ground in any way?
Well, thank you, Dalia. To start with the end of the pandemic, in sight comes the promise of global green recovery. We know that with much of the world looking at significant infrastructure spending to kickstart their economies post-pandemic, this represents an unprecedented opportunity for us in Masdar, where our purpose, our mission, and our mandate have never been more relevant. You know, as we celebrate the 15th anniversary this year, we are proud to say that Masdar is one of the fastest growing renewable companies in the world, with a footprint in more than 30 countries. In the year of the pandemic, and the year before, 2019 and 2020, we have doubled our capacity, investing or committing to invest in projects with a combined value of $20 billion and generating capacity of a gross 11 gigawatt, displacing over around 16 million tons of CO2 per year. Starting from our flagship project in Masdar City back in 2009, when we commissioned our 10 megawatt photovoltaic, which was a pioneering project at that time, commencing to our Shams CSP project in the Western region with 100 megawatt capacities, 768 parabolic trough collectors. These pushed the boundaries of innovations, of commercial deployment, financial restructuring, for us to spread our wings and deploy a much larger projects. Swihan project of 1.17 gigawatt, the latest record-breaking Al Dhafra PV project of 2 gigawatt at $1.3 per kilowatt hour, pushing the frontiers of other technologies in addition to solar and wind, We've partnered with BIA in Sharjah with the very first waste-to-energy project here in the UAE, 300,000 metric tons of solid municipal waste to produce clean energy from waste. Also in mid-2020, we have inaugurated the third phase of Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Solar Park. Phase 3 comprised of 800 megawatts and is part of what is to be the largest single-site solar park in the world, with planned capacity of around 5 gigawatt by the year 2030. In addition to that, we've expanded to the region in Saudi Arabia. We have the Jeddah PV project of 300 megawatt. Masdar and EDF Renewable announced back in 2019 that we've won the tender of Domat Al Jandal in Saudi Arabia with an installed capacity of 402 megawatt. That will be Saudi Arabia's first wind farm and the largest in the Middle East. Also in Oman, prior to that, we have commissioned a 50 megawatt wind project in Dhofar region, where it was the first investment in Oman's renewable energy sector.
Thank you very much. This is very impressive. And as an ex-Masdar student myself, I went to university in Masdar Institute and lived in Masdar City. And we're very pleased to see the projects continuing and Masdar continuing to grow and to lead these projects in the region. So moving away from power. So we see all these achievements in power. And one of your previous interviews, you have stated that because of the solar abundance and high radiation of solar here in the Middle East, green hydrogen will be produced at lowest cost possible internationally. And we saw Matthias presented some of the forecasts for costs moving forward for green hydrogen, which gives you the chance to play a primary role in hydrogen generally and green hydrogen particularly. In January, Masdar signed an MOU with Abu Dhabi Department of Energy, Etihad Airways, and many other big players to support the development of Abu Dhabi's green hydrogen sector. Can you tell us more about that? And aside from the abundance of solar resources, what makes the UAE a key player in green hydrogen? If you can give us a bit more examples about the enabling environment of the UAE, what enables us to go into innovation in this sector?
Exactly. UAE is not only a place where photovoltaic is being produced reliably at the lowest cost in the world. We're pushing the boundaries of $1 per kilowatt hour. Nonetheless, with the current structure that the Abu Dhabi Hydrogen Alliance, which I will explain in a minute, we have provided a platform where we are leveraging R&D, we're leveraging the existing infrastructure, policies, procedures that supports innovation to push the boundaries of hydrogen into the new era. And I don't know if you are aware, Masdar was one of the very first pioneers who started looking at hydrogen production back in 2008. You know, when I first joined Masdar, there was the HPAD project, which was presented to the Executive Council for approval. And at that time, we thought that this was a little too far ahead of the curve. We are really ahead of everyone else in the international community. Now we feel the time is really right to accelerate investment into the hydrogen spectrum. We are ready in hydrogen to build the very first large-scale demonstrator plant that will show the potential viability of green hydrogen, focusing on the different spectrums of the sustainable fuel products that address, for example, green diesel and green kerosene. You must have heard about DEWA launching the green hydrogen project recently. Our project has a much wider variety of products, and it's 15 times larger in capacity. So this puts it in scale, because we know that now, as we speak, the hydrogen industry is capital intensive. And for green hydrogen, which is currently still expensive, for it to make sense commercially, we need to accelerate the growth and development where we can achieve commercial critical mass. And that's key. When it comes to the hydrogen industry as the future of what we call the alternative fuel moving forward, we expect that the green hydrogen by itself, we know that there is gray, there is blue. If we take the green hydrogen itself, which we in Masdar believe is the future, we expect it to reach around 530 million metric tons by the year 2050. That would displace around 10.4 billion barrels of oil equivalent. 10.5 billion barrels, that's around 37% of the pre-pandemic global oil production. The green hydrogen export market could be worth up to around $300 billion yearly by the year 2050, creating around 500,000 jobs globally in renewable energy and hydrogen production. Now, the Abu Dhabi has created a platform that would look at the hydrogen holistically, that would bring all the value chain and value proposition on the table. This trilateral agreement that was signed back in January with ADNOC, Mubadala, and ADQ has set the scene for us to push boundaries of that entire spectrum of hydrogen. Following that, we have created a consortium that started with 5, then 7, now we are 12 entities. We have Masdar, Siemens, Marubeni, we have Etihad, Lufthansa, Khalifa University to bring in the R&D and innovation, the Abu Dhabi Department of Economic Development, OMV, and the list keeps growing and growing. And with this holistic approach, we will adopt the fastest and most reliable approach whereby we can commercialize hydrogen and take it into the new frontiers of liberal economy of scale and competitiveness to other fuels. If you, for example, look in particularly on the green kerosene, we expect that to become at liberal economy of scale competitive around the year 2030, and the market will even grow larger and larger as we speak.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Green hydrogen will be very important for this region. As we mentioned, as we transition, we want to make sure that the transition is fair economically. So in this region, we can move from abundant oil and gas resources, and we have a lot that can be used to produce green hydrogen in terms of solar resources, availability of land, infrastructure that we can leverage on, for example, maybe pipelines that can be redirected, etc. So we look forward, and also it goes well with the vision of the region to be a knowledge-based economy. So it goes well with the vision of innovation and looking into the future.
Indeed.
So thank you very much. We will now move to another main developer in the region, Mr. Rajiv. We will also, if you can tell us about the main developments of Aquapower in the region these days, and also give us a bit of how the pandemic has impacted your activities on the ground in any way.
Yeah, good morning, Diala. Good morning, all my fellow panelists, and also to the viewers. Before I respond to you, I think, let me just share a quick observation. I think I must have done something right. I must have got off from bed on the right side this morning, because guess what? I'm in a panel with my favorite banker. I'm on the panel with my favorite lawyer and law firm, and I'm on the panel with my favorite and most respected peer, Masdar. So I'm actually very delighted, honored, and pleased with this. Now, responding to your question, Diala, at the very outset, I have to clarify that from an operations perspective, the pandemic has had minimal impact on our portfolio. Our portfolio team and our O&M subsidiary, NOMAC, have put in place a very robust health and safety arrangements over the last 14 months. And we have operated all our plants at the availability levels that we and our stakeholders have budgeted for or were expecting, even before the pre-pandemic scenario. And this goes for both our renewables and conventional fleet. Likewise, our assets under construction, and we have quite a few of them. We have 12 assets, about $12 billion of power and water assets which are under construction right now. They have shown limited slippage, and in some cases, very few, a couple of them out of 12, where there have been a couple of months of slippage, we have got the contractual time relief protection from the off-taker. Let me now move on the growth side of the business. There is really positive sign in the sense that we have not seen in this last 14, 15 months any project cancellations. Although I do need to recognize that the bid cycle and the time to financial closing has definitely lengthened. This is one of the aftermaths of the pandemic as we perceive it. In the renewable space, our project pipeline has never been so strong as we speak. We have more than a dozen transactions spanning solar PV, wind, and green hydrogen in advanced development, including some landmark transactions like the PIF program's largest solar PV called the Sudair IPP. It's a 1.5 gigawatt, which is a week away from financial close, and construction has started a couple of weeks back. From the Aquapower point of view, in most of the jurisdictions that we operate in, the pandemic has definitely not slowed the advent of renewable projects. To the contrary, it has encouraged several jurisdictions to look even more closely at green initiatives and the energy transition to a decarbonized asset fleet. Thank you.
Yes, this aligns well with what Matthias was presenting earlier this morning, that we saw 2019 and then again in 2020 a big interest in the world and the uptake of the energy transition and more green technologies. Moving on from power projects, Aquapower is part of a 7-team consortium that was formed to drive the cost of green hydrogen below $2 per kilogram by 2026. And we saw this is possible from what was presented earlier. Green hydrogen typically costs between $2.5 per kilogram and $9.5 today. Also, the timeline in 4 years is ahead of some of the forecasts made. So what are the factors that enable this ambitious target?
Thank you for this question, Diala. At the outset, I have to clarify that green hydrogen production is a mixture of very mature technologies, and that they have been present in several existing industrial applications. You heard Mohammed mention about it, that Masdar even started trying to look at it from a scale perspective back in 2008. That's 13 years back. And therefore, the heating value of hydrogen has been well known for decades together now. This is not new. The hype of green hydrogen being a transition fuel, being a decarbonizer, is largely linked to renewable energy costs that is coming down. And that serves as one of the most important cost inputs. And because this renewable energy cost is dramatically going down and has been brought to unprecedented levels on utility scales, and as a primary consequence, electrolysis costs also being brought down through the scale effect, all of this is now starting to become commercially viable and is rapidly going down in terms of cost. This is also helped with the evolution of battery storage, which is a parallel development taking place and which is also exponentially improving the dispatchability of solar technology. Now, Aquapower has taken a strategic view on green hydrogen, and we have several projects at various stages of development, including the NEOM green hydrogen project in the Kingdom of Saudi, which is in a very advanced development. As a thumb rule, we see hydrogen as being in the same state as what solar energy was 5 years back. And it will for sure experience aggressive and promising cost and delivery outcomes over the coming half a decade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rajiv. So now we're going to move into the financing side of things. So we will talk to Mr. Rajiv's favorite banker, Mr. Sunil. So Mr. Sunil, In 2020, Standard Chartered announced that it would invest $75 billion to reduce the impact of its operation and that of its customers on the environment through to 2024. So $40 billion will be directed into financing services for infrastructure that promotes sustainable development, and $35 billion of project financing services, merger and acquisition advisory, and debt structuring services for renewable energy projects. So this is part of Standard Chartered's plan to become net zero across its global properties by 2030 across 60 countries. Can you tell us more about...
I can't hear you, Dial. I don't know whether it's only me or...
Okay. So I will just repeat very briefly. So can you tell us about Standard Chartered plans towards the funding the energy transition, and what does this mean for the MENA region specifically?
No, I can only see Rajit. I can't see or hear anybody. Rajit, can you hear me?
We can all hear you. Okay. I think Mr. Sunil will log off and on again. So maybe in the meantime, we can go to Bari, and then we will go back to Sunil when he's back. So Bari, we're going to look at the legal side of things. So from your experience in the region, what are the most important enabling factors that make renewable energy deployment a success story, and what are the main legal challenges?
Thank you, Diala, and thank you for your opening insights, and thank you to CEBC for having me on the panel. It's a pleasure to speak alongside such an esteemed panel today. In terms of the renewable deployment and the success story of that and the challenges around that, as you mentioned, Diala, the region has, of course, some of the largest hydrocarbon reserves and the highest oil and gas production levels in the world. But notwithstanding that, we have still seen a successful deployment of renewables in the region. And a lot of that has stemmed from policy background. The majority of states have committed to quite ambitious renewable energy targets. So, for example, 60 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030 in Saudi. The UAE has a target of 44% of renewable energy by 2050, with actually more ambitious targets at an emirate level. Oman and Jordan have targets of 30% by 2030, and so on across the region. So governments in the regions have policy commitments to renewable energy, and as part of that, they've committed to renewable energy programs off the back of the targets. And so we've seen, as has been discussed, a very successful large-scale renewable energy program being deployed across the region, mostly based on solar energy and procured and developed across the region. But what has driven that success, aside from the targets, as well as, I suppose, environmental pressures, in the hydrocarbon states, so primarily in the GCC, of course, there's a need to diversify the economies away from hydrocarbons and to free up hydrocarbons for other uses. So again, quite policy-centered, but there's an opportunity cost of using these hydrocarbon resources for domestic energy consumption. In the non-hydrocarbon producing states, so countries such as Jordan, there's a clear emphasis on reducing dependency on imported energy and increasing energy security. So that obviously is extremely important. And I think more than even legal policies or laws supporting the drivers to then develop projects and off the back of these policy commitments, I think the projects have been supported by the success of the large-scale tenders across the region. The success has bred more success. And so we've seen increased global investment in renewables, we've seen developments in technology efficiency, increased competition, rapid competition, as well as reduced technology costs. So all of that has come together really to promote the full-scale sort of deployment of, I'd say, utility-scale renewables in the region. And projects, of course, have been upsized quite often from the original tender, including the developers on the panel today. We've often seen mega-sized projects in the region. I suppose outside of the GCC, apologies, we've seen maybe slightly smaller sized projects, but those projects have had the support of institutional financing. So I think that's also been key when we've seen institutional financing available for the development of projects in countries such as Jordan and Egypt. In this region, generally speaking, it's correct to say that renewables was somewhat slow to take off compared to other regions of the world, but there's certainly now a steady flow of large-scale tenders in the region, and that's set to continue. As Rajiv mentioned, the pipeline is vast at the moment. But there do remain challenges, and there's a lot still to be done, including from a legal perspective. So subsidy reform is still something that is ongoing in the region. Increased energy diversification is key to the region as well. And there's a lot more to facilitate the energy transition generally, not just focusing on utility scale renewables, because I think utility scale renewables has managed to be developed in the absence, in some cases, of even renewable specific laws. We've seen renewable specific laws in countries such as Jordan and Egypt and so on, facilitating the deployment of renewables. But elsewhere in the region, that hasn't been necessary. They've managed to be developed on a large scale without specific regulation. But I think to facilitate the energy transition going forward, and I know we're going to talk about it in further detail, so I don't want to go into detail now, but I think further regulation is going to be required to facilitate the energy transition generally as we move away just from looking at utility scale renewables.
Thank you, Vari. And we have Mr. Sunil back with us. I hope this time it will work. So yes, it's working perfectly. Welcome back, Mr. Sunil.
I got your question. In terms of the commitment we made of the 75 billion. Well, let me first of all thank you for having me here, and sorry for the interruption. I really don't know what happened, but just to give a little bit of perspective on the commitment that we've made. I think there are a couple of aspects to it. This is on the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. We have said by 2030 we'll be net zero. But on scope 3, which is the financing which results in emissions, we said it's going to be 2050. And one of the pillars to net zero by 2050 for scope 3 is how do we facilitate, is one of the pillars, it's not the only one, is how do we facilitate and in many ways accelerate the transition. So the $75 billion is committed towards that. And I think there are a couple of aspects to it. Customers who are ready, like Rajiv, like Masdar, who are ready and share the ambition already, have a framework for implementation. The $75 billion is available for deployment. So that is for customers who are sharing the same ambition and mindset. But I think a large part of the customer base is either just about starting or has not yet started. And this financing is not something which would be available to them because they would not qualify for it. So what we are doing for those customers is actually helping them and hand-holding them to really create the roadmap. In the case they are just about to start, create the roadmap for them to be able to meet this net zero ambition and commitment. And the ones who have not started as yet, and do remember that there's a lot of fear, uncertainty in corporates as you start going down the ladder. When you're sitting right on top, it is quite different. But if you're looking at slightly smaller corporates, there's a lot of fear and a lack of certainty in terms of how do you implement this. And there we are helping them to really identify the most credible levers that they can pull and help them to really come up to a point where they can set a framework. Because what's going to happen, and I don't know how, and we don't think it is very, very clear to a lot of the corporates, particularly in MENA. And when I say MENA, as you rightly said, Diala, that it is a very different multi-track, multi-dimensional, multi-speed approach. So UAE, Saudi at the forefront, and a couple of other GCC countries, but there are a lot of others who are lagging. So I think what is going to really happen, and what we are seeing really coming quite quickly, is a kind of a pincer type movement where availability of capital is going to become a challenge if you're not having a credible plan. Most banks will not be able to finance you, irrespective of your sector. I'm talking about if you're carbon emitting. Then on the supply chain, there's a big pressure coming through. MNCs are looking at their supply chains and saying, you know what, if you're not having a clear plan, you're not going to be part of our ecosystem. And lastly, let's not forget what regulation is doing. So if you look at Europe, what they've done, and they're at the forefront of it, the carbon adjustment border mechanism, or carbon border adjustment mechanism. Clearly, they're going to put a tax on imports from countries and companies which are not going to be net zero or don't have a plan in place or not certified to have a credible plan. And that's where, again, we create the framework to help our corporates. So I think this is a wake-up call and a call to action for a lot of the corporates in the region, that this is coming, and it's coming very fast. It may not yet be, because the banks, the financiers, and this reminds me, 8-10 years ago when I don't know how the example, I hope the example is relevant, when all the AML regulations were coming in, your international banks led with it, and there was a lot of pain and angst that, oh my God, you guys are making things so difficult for us. But today it's become a norm, because you know what happened when FATF came in and AML regulations have come into local regulations, so on and so forth. So I think we're moving that direction. While the regulation is coming from the West, I think the compliance will be required across the board. So it's a call to action for all the corporates who want to be part of a broader ecosystem.
Thank you, Mr. Sunil. And do you think the region is ready for the ESG financing?
I think parts of it are ready. As I said, if you look at the leading corporates, you mentioned Etihad, they've already done a financing which we were part of, linked to ESG goals. You've got Majid Al Futtaim Group, you've got Aqua, you've got Masdar who are there. But there is a whole slew of these are the top-notch blue chip companies. But there are a whole slew of corporates who are not ready, and countries who are not ready. So we've done Zeronomics, what we call a report which we did to understand the preparedness of companies, and 3 in 5 believe that they are not yet ready. These are companies themselves talking about it. 3 in 5 say that we are not yet ready. A similar percentage say that they're likely to delay their plans because of COVID, and because their focus has shifted into doing other stuff, which is probably immediate and existential. Do remember, what we're trying to do is a multi-year, future, forward-looking initiative, and there are quite a few challenges which are immediate. So I think there's been a diversion in terms of invest in technology to create access, invest in maybe creating more efficiencies in your projects right now or your company right now. So it is not top of the mind. And we really don't have an ecosystem of regulation, of rules in place, which are forcing companies to either go in for disclosure or to come up with a plan. But it is coming, and it is coming fast, particularly for companies that access financing from international markets, international agencies, or international banks to start with. But I think it is very soon going to go into the banking system. And you know how it will go into the local banking system? Because somebody may say, my local bank actually is never going to do this. It is going to go into the local banking system because local banks also access the international markets. So when they are accessing the international markets, their portfolios come under scrutiny. It's already happening in the West to say, okay, what is your portfolio? What's your exposure? What's your climate risk on your portfolio? What is your sustainability strategy? And if those banks are unable to demonstrate credibly that they have a plan, the cost of capital and the cost of funding goes up. And you know what they're going to do? They are going to come up with a plan, which means they'll do exactly what we're doing, perhaps maybe a couple of years later. So it is an interconnected world, and I don't think there is any escaping from it.
Exactly. It is very remarkable how it picks up very fast due to us being all connected. So it's not only the virus that spreads very fast, it's also good practices that spread, and it's very nice to see that. So Mr. Sunil, you mentioned that so many companies and countries are not ready for ESG. Sorry, we did not spell out ESG I hate to use acronyms without saying what they are: environment, social, and governance criteria when it comes to financing. So a lot of countries are not ready for it. So this brings us to our second part of our discussion. So we go back to Muhammad, going back to Masdar. Going into the context of countries that we mentioned in the MENA are still a bit lagging behind the main players of the clean energy in the region. So Muhammad, can you tell us about Masdar projects in less developed markets? For example, we know Masdar is very prominent in Jordan. And what enabling factors led you to go there? First, how did Masdar go to Jordan? And what would be required from other countries to attract you to their market? So what would it take to take Masdar to come to my country, Lebanon, for example, a country that is blooming in so many crises where we are in desperate need of an energy transition?
Well, thank you, Dalia, for this question. I think Masdar, like any other business, we aim to create value to our shareholder, especially if the shareholder is Mubadala Investment Company, which is the Abu Dhabi main investment vehicle and also one of the largest investment portfolios in the world. But at the same time, we are helping to diversify the UAE's economy and bringing new geographies and sectors into our portfolio. We, as a strategy, always seek long-term bankable projects with clearly defined risk boundaries, calculated risk, call it if you will, as well as strong partnership in each and every country we operate. We rely on our expertise, on our knowledge, know-how, local presence, and also our ability to scale and to make the right connections and find the right opportunities wherever we operate, underline right opportunities. Masdar always looks for growth through platform and joint ventures, enabling us to work with local partners. We like to reinforce the local content and bring value to any region or place we operate in. We always seek commonality in partners, and we bring strong elements to any partnership, such as strong technical EPC financing, structuring skills, for example. So let us go back to the regions. We were amongst the very first who started in Jordan. In Jordan, currently we have Baynuna, which is a 200 megawatt photovoltaic project that will power approximately 160,000 homes and displace around 360,000 tons of CO2. In addition, we have also Tawila JWPC, 117 megawatt wind. We started early on in Egypt. We have 10 megawatt photovoltaic in a place called Siwa. And we started also many of the projects in Egypt that account up to 30% of the grid capacity in these western borderline with Libya communities. We've established Infinity Power in Egypt, which is a joint venture with Infinity Energy, the Egypt's leading renewable energy developer, to develop utility scale and distributed solar energy and wind power projects in Egypt and take it as a launch pad to go to Africa. In Africa, we believe there are great opportunities. We have two projects in Seychelles, for example. We have 7 megawatt wind and 5 megawatt PV. We believe even in, let's call them less privileged countries, there are great opportunities. If these countries at least commit to the right governance, as Vari mentioned, the right regulatory frameworks, and work diligently to work in a consistent pattern by providing the required guarantees on sovereign funds, by approaching the right financial institutions, for example, the African Development Bank, with the right message that promotes sustainability, that promotes the global initiatives into carbon neutrality. And with that consistent approach, we can still make it happen. Of course, there are other technical parameters, and this is where I put my engineering hat. And for a project to work, for example, in Lebanon, our most prominent challenge is not regulations and governance, because I know that Lebanese are far advanced, even other Arab nations, in the way they interacted with the Western culture, civilization, in the way they adopted regulatory frameworks, in the way they have the forward thinking to adopt and approach even much faster and in an accelerated manner any new governance that you can put on the table, because Lebanon is full of talent. Nonetheless, from a technical point of view, to develop mega-scale renewable energy projects, we need infrastructure. We need to be able to penetrate and export such capacity. And in countries like Lebanon, that would be the most prominent challenge because of, whatever is happening on the ground, whatever the government is doing to promote, all these development projects on the ground. It's not doing enough, unfortunately. And I hope that in the near future, we have a more sound, well-structured government that would give more stability, more comfort to developers like us, like Aquapower, to go and invest there, and also continue and commence a consistent development of their infrastructure to enable such renewable energy projects to be adopted and developed.
Thank you, Mohammed. We share your hopes as well. Thank you. All right, so moving to another country that has managed to attract investments. And Mohammed, you mentioned the importance of development banks and development funding institutions. So we can go to Morocco now with Rajiv. So Aquapower has developed projects in Morocco, one of the first CSP projects in the world, and a large part of it was due to the development financing opportunities there. But of course, there's a lot more. And Mohammed mentioned the importance of infrastructure. I think infrastructure was made available for this project. So can you tell us more about your experience in Morocco and what has led to the success of your projects?
Thank you, Diala. Thank you for the opportunity to showcase a little bit about our experience in Morocco. We started in 2012, so that's almost 8 years back, which is a long time when you see how the global landscape for renewables has evolved. Our experience, our whole experience trajectory in Morocco have been very critical for our evolution as a leading player in the renewables globally. We are today the largest, owning and operating the largest fleet of concentrated solar plants. We have total 11 gigawatts of renewables under construction, advanced development, or in operation. And we hold the world record for some of the lowest tariffs under the public-private partnership model for many of these renewable projects. Especially very proud of the last solar utility scale project, which is the Al Faisalia, or now renamed as the Shoiba 600 megawatt project, with a tariff of 1.04 cents levelized tariff. Almost broke the sound barrier there. Anyway, the lessons learned across the renewable technologies, be it CSP with thermal storage or operating utility scale large solar PVs and wind farms, have provided us with a lot of valuable insights in relation to project execution, operations, and how you basically manage the commercial and the technical aspects of these large, complex projects through their life cycle. We have already replicated, and actually beyond replication, I would say we have significantly improved at scale our Moroccan success story in a number of other geographies and jurisdictions. And a case in point for me would be what has been achieved a couple of years back for the Noor Energy 1 CSP cum PV project in here locally in Dubai under the umbrella of DEWA, where we have been able to demonstrate the commercial viability and bankability of round-the-clock dispatchability using renewable solar power vis-a-vis conventional alternatives. Please let me remind everyone that the Noor Energy 1 project, which is a $4.3 billion single-site renewable project in advanced construction right now here in Sheikh Maktoum Park in Dubai, is actually the first project in the world which will deliver 24/7, 365 days a year electricity to the grid as a renewable project. It's a complement of CSP, storage, and PV that enables it to to reach this unique distinction. Our experiences also in developing wind farms, especially in Morocco, has been very rich, and we have a 120 megawatt wind farm called the Khaladi wind farm in Morocco. It has also enabled us to understand the operations of large-scale wind farms. It may be noted that the Khaladi wind farm in Morocco that I'm talking about, on top of being a large-scale utility wind asset in our portfolio, it also represents one of our early exposure to corporate PPA schemes. 5 years back, actually 6 years back, or 5.5 years back, when there was not so much traction on the corporate PPAs, at least in the emerging markets, Khaladi wind farm, 120 megawatt, was one of the first unique utility scale project which put in place a bankable corporate PPA scheme. And it was not short-term PPAs, it was long-term PPAs of 20 years, where we had 3 large PPAs consuming more than 80% of the wind generation, spread across the cement industry. And the schemes that the scheme that we put in place are now gaining more and more momentum, especially in the regions of Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, where we are now very busy structuring a diverse power offtake structure to accommodate the customer's need, a lot of it based on these corporate PPA schemes. So that, in essence, both from a technology perspective, from a commercial perspective, and from a structure perspective, was the interesting experiences that we developed in the last half a decade in Morocco, which we are successfully replicating in the other footprints where we operate or we intend to operate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is very, very interesting and very, very hopeful to hear. And it's very interesting when we see the mix of technologies coming together to deliver one solution for various objectives. Thank you very much. So going back to Vari, so we heard about the requirements in the countries where we are looking into more of a challenging transition. Can you give us more insights about the legal situation and what is required in terms of legal framework, if we can go and dive into this context a bit more?
Okay, so I mean, in terms of looking at the broader energy transition, which is what I suppose where I left last time, and as opposed to just utility scale renewables, which obviously, you know, is extremely important, but there's much more to the energy transition than just looking at utility scale renewables. I think, first of all, just a couple of points that are not strictly speaking legal. The first one is that the current momentum that we've seen in terms of renewables deployment, that needs to be maintained if the full potential of renewables and the energy transition is to be realized in the region and the countries are to achieve their renewable energy targets. So we really need that momentum to continue, and it looks like it's going to, but obviously, you know, there's still a long way to go. The second one is that, and Sunil has touched on this already as well, that developers of renewable energy projects and the energy transition as a whole will benefit from a renewed emphasis on sustainability by lenders. So the sort of ESG focus, it was coming already, but I think it's been exemplified by the COVID pandemic. We do, however, still see that there's a challenge of funding conventional fuel-based projects, that should, I think, be advantageous to the energy transition. That challenge was already apparent before, and the increased pressure on banks to pursue sustainable and environmentally friendly practices, I think, will benefit the energy transition. Having said that, so I think there's also a difference, and this is a challenge sort of both from a financing but also a structuring perspective in terms of energy transition or renewable energy projects that benefit from fixed or guaranteed tariffs versus those which are more subject to merchant risk, and they're less likely to attract a pool of lenders, or they'll attract a smaller pool of lenders. I think that's an ongoing challenge, and one of the key requirements to try and get around that is that we need to make sure that there is actually tailored regulation. And that's really where, I'd like to move on to some of the sort of topics that we need to address from a legal perspective. Looking at, firstly, distributed energy. If we look at the C&I market, the regulatory regime for the C&I market is less developed. And again, there's an emerging difference in approaches between hydrocarbon and non-hydrocarbon producing countries. The GCC countries generally limit the ability of the C&I market to enter into corporate or private PPAs. And that approach is, they take generally as of one of net metering, where the excess power is transferred to what's normally a monopoly off-taker to offset future utility bills. Now, the restrictions I think that net metering has, it really limits the ability of the C&I market and rooftop solar market to reach its full potential. Outside of the GCC, other countries have taken different approaches. So in Jordan, for example, Jordan also has a wheeling regime in place, and that facilitates corporate or private PPAs. So from a legal perspective, more can be done from a legal and regulatory perspective to facilitate the growth of the C&I market. Moving on to storage, the emphasis on utility scale PV in the region, of course, presents clear technical challenges to grid operators in terms of intermittent supply, and also making sure that the grid is properly balanced. So storage is really quite key. We've seen this massive emphasis on utility scale PV. The ability of storage to step in, and Rajiv's already mentioned that the plant in Dubai, the CSP plant, has the ability to have 24/7 output, and that's of course because it has the ability to have storage attached to it, with the molten salt storage that attaches to CSP. But we have a massive amount of PV sitting in the region already, or currently under construction or being tendered, and so alternative types of storage are being explored. And I think having in place tailored regulation to help promote the development and deployment of storage is going to be important. And it's also, the development, it's not just deployment, it is the development as well, because the emphasis on storage, I think, there's a lot of talk about it, but clearly there are a lot of things that still have to be properly assessed from both a technical and from a scalability perspective. And we need the regulation as well, I think, to walk hand in hand with that development. Hydrogen, we've heard a lot about hydrogen already, so I don't want to go into too much detail. There's obviously a lot of projects in the pipeline, including from both Aqua and Mazda, as they've mentioned already. The opportunities are vast, and obviously the opportunities for what it can be used for are vast in terms of grid stabilization, transportation, industrial uses, gas networks, and so on. But the regulatory regime isn't there yet. The regulatory regime is a bit lagging in terms of hydrogen in the region. And I think if it's going to reach its full potential, again, that's an area where we need to see more tailored regulation, particularly, to facilitate the deployment of green hydrogen projects. Because I think, as has been discussed, they're set to become a key part of the energy transition. And the last part, just briefly, is on the digitalization and blockchain. And it's a little bit related to the distributed energy C&I point that I mentioned. But I think the development of decentralized electricity markets, management and trading, and potential use of independent microgrids, that presents policy and regulatory challenges, because some of the challenges that I mentioned in relation to the C&I market also limit or prevent the development of, for example, microgrids. So in order to realize that full potential, we're going to need to see either new or changed regulation that will facilitate really the full potential of digitalization, blockchain, and potentially microgrids in the region being developed. At the moment, a lot of this just aren't simply possible based on the current regulatory regimes. So that's sort of each of those topics. I could probably talk half an hour to an hour or two rather than just a few seconds, but happy, of course, to take questions on any of them, but hopefully that's a bit of a taster as to where I think there's quite a lot of regulation needed.
Thank you, Vari. This is indeed a very interesting topic, and I wish we had more hours to discuss. So far, we have 10 more minutes, and I would like to use them very efficiently. So Sunil, back to you before we take questions from the floor. Very discussed the importance of regulatory framework, a stable regulatory framework, and its role in attracting financing. So at the same time, we have seen that the global discourse on climate change has been focused in some countries. Is it prominent in, how can we make it prominent in the rest of the world? How can we make financing for renewable energy feasible in the rest of the world?
No, that's a great point, and I'm conscious of time. I'll keep my response brief. I think it has to start with, first of all, in the countries that are lagging, you cannot leave them behind. It cannot be a world where you leave large swaths of emerging economies behind. So there will have to be engagement. Clearly, the West is leading because the West has the bulk share in terms of the emissions. There has been movement around civil society movement, NGO movement, shareholder activism, which has forced them to really accelerate their plans and create the taxonomies, create the regulation, and even political change. So we need to pick up the best practices and really create the awareness and the policies in some of these markets. It's absolutely essential. Now, again, as we said, there are divergences. So we're talking about markets which are lagging, and one of the big catalysts can be access to finance, not from the point of view of denying finance, but saying that you get this access to finance provided you start shaping policy around a net zero, and that starts with the budgetary kind of decisions that are made within the budget. How do you finance the deficit? And most have an international component to it. I think that requires a lot of engagement to take place. The other one, which is very, very important to get, and then we see a wall of capital waiting to come in. And as you rightly said at the outset, that the share in Middle East and Africa you mentioned is minuscule. The reason is because there's a lot of concern around transparency, metrics, and greenwashing. So again, you come back to how do you create the framework? How do you monitor? How do you test and ensure that it is going into the right projects and is generating the right outcomes? So I think it's all about, you're going to have a multi-speed approach to it. There's nothing wrong with it. Some sector, we are going to increase overall emissions in some emerging markets. That's a fact of life. But you're going to have countermeasures so that the net emissions come off. And that also means, we didn't touch upon it, we don't have the time, is how do you create carbon trading markets? That's very, very important, because you've got in this region, if you take the example, and we just about launched in Singapore with SGX and with Temasek a carbon exchange. So you create the opportunity for institutions in the transition period to purchase those credits, and the money goes into projects which create the offset. Some natural, some which are more investment led. So there is a whole swath of things that need to be done. But I think, being a banker, I'll have a biased view, but finance can be a catalyst for it.
Definitely, it's the most important catalyst, maybe one or among the most important ones. Okay, so from here we will move into the socio-economic benefits of renewable energy, or the energy transition. We can no longer speak about renewable energy alone. We have to speak of it as a transition, because as jobs are created and as industries are created, some are sometimes lost along the way, and we want to make sure that nobody is left behind. So not in terms of starting point of countries, and this is something you mentioned, Sunil, and this is very important for us at IRENA, to always iterate that not all countries start from the same starting point, and we are not expecting all countries to be net zero by 2050. Net zero is on a global level, and different countries have different paces of transition. But also, one important dimension of this transition is to make it just and fair, and to make sure that whatever we are losing along the way, we are creating jobs, industries, and it's not just only jobs, it's also the quality of the jobs that are created with renewable energy. Maybe they're a bit more safe than other industries, maybe they are even more involved in innovation and technology. So from here, I will go back to Rajiv. So we will talk about a bit of local content. And we have a question from Dr. Raed, who is also, we've been discussing with Dr. Raed the opportunities for local value creation in the MENA region for a long time, because we see an immense opportunity for job creation and value creation. So Dr. Raed's question is about local content plans for Sudair solar project with financing from the, I think from the international, sorry, with the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia. So can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, with pleasure, with pleasure. Thank you for the question, Dr. Raed. It's a good, interesting question. And of course, no discussion on the energy transition, as you said, Diala, is complete without talking about the socio-economic benefit. Look, let me give a few facts out there, which will probably help to respond to Dr. Raed. First and foremost, the PIF, well, what is the total space of renewable that the Kingdom of Saudi is stated to put out there? It's about 60 gigawatts that they are powering up in the next decade, just in terms of numbers and stats. The way they have now decided, and this is all public information that I'm putting out there, is that 70% of it will be implemented by PIF, and 30% of it will be implemented by the Ministry of Energy under the REPTO, the so-called REPTO program, through the international tendering competitive procurement route. And Aquapower, on one hand, will be competing with the Mazdars of the world, EDF Renewables, and NL Greens, and so on and so forth of the world on the 30%. But Aquapower also has been chosen by PIF in the short to medium term as its technical implementation partner for the 70% of this overall procurement. Now, the 70% procurement under PIF is something that is heavily regulated, for those of you who don't know, by ECRA, the regulator, who has been given now enormous amount of teeth, has now started to demonstrate itself as one of the, I would say, very strong regulator, energy regulator, has been well-staffed, is now bringing in the best practices of the world, and so on and so forth. Now, the regulator will make sure that the procurement implementation of the PIF program is going to mirror and follow what is going to happen in parallel on the 30% international tender that the Ministry of Energy through REPTO will be following, which means the tariff will be benchmarked to what progressively will get set through this tendering route. And the rules of the procurement for the 70% PIF program will be no different from what that will be applicable for this 30% implementation. And there I bring the link back to what Dr. Raed was asking, which is the localization requirement on Sudair IPP, which is the first flagship 1500 megawatt, the largest in the kingdom, but under the PIF implementation program, is mirroring exactly the requirements that were put in place for the REPTO 2 procurement program, which is just gone into construction for some of the winners like Mazdar and so on and so forth. So if the requirement there was 32% for this round of procurement, the requirement for Sudair is going to be 32%. I'm just giving an example. But the REPTO program in itself is devised to step up the game and keep improving through successive and progressive implementation of REPTO 3, REPTO 4, REPTO 5, and so on and so forth. The level of the socio-economic impact and localization is expected to step up to significant numbers in a meaningful manner, including the component of manufacturing, not just the employment, but also the component of manufacturing. And therefore, this is how they are keeping the entire ecosystem of the 60 gigawatts that will be implemented fair and true to reflect the best benchmarks of competitive procurement? Thank you.
Thank you. It's very interesting. I see why Dr. Raed wanted to speak about this. Very interesting. So our time is almost over, but we asked for 5 more minutes. I will go back to every panelist to summarize main takeaways. I think we can do half a minute each, because before that, I would like to go back to Muhammad. In the discussion on, but maybe in the meantime, panelists can think of a half a minute takeaway. Muhammad, in the meantime, can we touch upon water? I mean, the MENA region is a region that is highly stressed in water. It's part of the socio-economic, maybe let's say nexus between energy and water in the region that is very important that we cannot disregard. So let's give some time to water before we move on to the main takeaways. What are the plans for desalination, and what is the future outlook for desalination in the region?
Well, you are touching upon the topic that is near and dear to my heart. You know, we always say that water sits as a center stage of sustainable development. Thus, we have the water energy nexus and water energy food, and water for energy and energy for water. I think in Masdar back in 2015, we decided that it's time for us to play such a prominent role in taking the new generation of water production to the new phase. We've launched the Rantut program, which was an innovative program partnering with, we started with 4, then 5, then 6 of the largest in the industry, including Veolia, Suez, Mascara on localized solutions. At that time, Abengoa Water, which was really huge in the industry before the financial crisis, in addition to Trevi Systems, who were promoting the forward osmosis as an innovative solution. We focused on membrane desalination because we believe this is the future, and because of the diversification of our energy portfolios worldwide, we need to decouple that, not so much happily ever after marriage between thermal, power generation using steam turbines and thermal desalination. We've launched this program, and 3 out of the 5 have succeeded in meeting both the qualitative and quantitative. And now, these parameters, you can hear it resonate, the Rantut program outcome, as setting the seam of this new generation of membrane technology that aims to, drastically reduce the energy intensity, because we know that desalination is an energy intensive process. We used to talk about 4 and 4.2 kilowatt hour per meter cubic. Now we are pushing the boundaries up to 3. And I'm talking that in relevance to the Gulf water, which has very high salinity. And also coupling the desalination with renewable energy, thus the concept of sustainable water desalination. You will be hearing that concept coming more and more, and the international community at large needs to push boundaries into regulating this concept. So with new tenders and the new bids, we were all talking about, you know, the sustainability pillars. We are all talking about carbon neutrality. The carbon footprint of water desalination is huge. But with this, we reduce that carbon footprint to the lowest possible. We couple the desalination with an environmentally friendly R&D, most prominently ZLD, the zero liquid discharge. And you know what? All this bundle still needs to be cost competitive. So now we start at, if I recall back in 2012-13, $2.8 per metric cubic. Now we are at 40 cents per metric cubic, and it's even further decreasing. So we believe that we are now on the verge of the next phase of a large utility scale commercialization of such technology that is sustainable, that has the lowest carbon footprint, that uses the latest of energy efficient membrane desalination, and that is mostly cost effective.
Thank you. This is very hopeful and very interesting. I wish we had more time. So unfortunately, we need to wrap up this session. So Mohammed, by the time you think of your 30-second takeaway, we'll start with the ladies first. So Vari, can you give us a 30-second takeaway of the session? What would you like to say?
Thank you, and thanks very much for the opportunity. In terms of renewable projects, there really is positivity in the market. So we've seen a slowdown in procurements as a result of the pandemic, but the sector did not escape the wrath of the pandemic, but the pipeline is strong. So that's really positive. But we do also need to clearly focus on the broader energy transition, a just transition and decarbonisation. So we need to maintain the momentum of renewable energy projects, but we need to facilitate the development and deployment of key technology. We need to facilitate strong ESG policies. We need to facilitate C&I and distributed renewables, commercial industrial. We need to facilitate microgrids and really take a hold of technology, the opportunities that blockchain will provide. And of course, green hydrogen, and we didn't get into the discussion today, but things such as district cooling and in some countries, of course, district heating, those have, a massive impact on greenhouse gas emissions. So those also need to be a core part of the energy transition. But I think it's a positive discussion. There's a long way to go, of course, and it's a journey that I think everyone is on. And hopefully we'll all continue on that. And maybe this time next year, we'll have a bit more to talk about and see how far along that journey we've reached.
So, Sunil?
Well, I would just say that, ESG is mainstream now. In terms of our own survey and assessment we have done, the region is slow to start off and take off. Again, with the caveat that there are different countries and different, speeds, multi-speed kind of an approach. If you look at the plans of most of the companies, they are talking about most of the action between 2030 and 40. So there's a lost decade between 2020 and 2030. So I would really urge everyone to really make, coherent plans in terms of compliance, because we are in a region which is resource-based. It's going to be of acute focus in terms of capital allocation, in terms of the overall carbon footprint that is generated out of this region. So I don't think there's any escaping the fact, and we are part of a connected ecosystem. So the pressure will be felt by one and all. So I think it's time to get plans together and start executing. And we are there to help in whichever way we can, our clients.
Thank you. And Rajiv?
Yeah, hi. I think my 30-second statement would be essentially the fact that, look, energy transition is the most defining event for this decade, or one of the most defining events of this decade, without a shadow of doubt. And I think in the context of that, the single most important trigger for us looking forward, not looking behind, but looking forward, is the how soon and how well we adapt and trigger the hydrogen economy.
Thank you very much. Indeed. Mohammed, we close with you.
Okay, one of my favorite writers, may her soul rest in peace, is Dr. Maya Angelou. She said, one of my favorite quotes is, you need to stop being normal to find how amazing you are. I think we need to think outside the box. We need to push boundaries in the way we think and approach renewable energy at all aspects, governance, regulations, financing. We need to realize as an international community that renewable clean energy and sustainability is not only it's our means to survive, it's our means to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. This is the best closing we could have hoped for. Thank you, Mohammed. So thank you for the organizers of this session. A big thank you for the panelists. It is true that the biggest event of this decade is the energy transition, and I am very honored to be part of it, and especially with you. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your very interesting insights, and thank you very much for the organizers of this panel. Thank you very much, and wishing you a good rest of the day and a very interesting discussion ahead in the rest of the workshop. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you all. All the best.